What if the sleeping giant of East Asia woke up not with a whisper, but with a nuclear roar? Picture a chilling dawn over the Pacific. The radar screens in Beijing and Washington light up simultaneously with an impossible signal. The Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force is no longer defending. In a broadcast that freezes financial markets globally, Tokyo announces the immediate repeal of Article 9. The pacifist chains are shattered. Suddenly, the Izumo-class helicopter destroyers are not carrying relief supplies. They are launching F-35Bs fully loaded for deep strike missions. Indigenous hypersonic missiles rise from hidden silos in Hokkaido. This is not a drill. It is the resurrection of a military titan that shifts the global balance of power in a single heartbeat. If Japan decides to draw the sword again, the security architecture of the last 80 years doesn't just crack, it collapses into dust. The year is 202x. The geopolitical atmosphere in East Asia is suffocating, thick with the static of jammed radars and intercepted communications. While the world's eyes are fixated on a grinding stalemate in Eastern Europe, the real storm gathers in the Tsushima Strait. The United States, plagued by internal political strife and a crippled economy, has quietly reduced its naval rotation in Yokosuka. The nuclear umbrella is looking more like a sieve. It begins on a Tuesday morning that seems deceptively calm. Suddenly, the Japan Coast Guard reports a massive intrusion. A gray zone swarm of 300 Chinese maritime militia vessels surrounding the Senkaku Islands, effectively cutting off all access. Simultaneously, North Korea launches a Hwasong-17 ICBM, but this time, it doesn't fly over. It detonates a conventional warhead in the Sea of Japan, creating a shockwave that shatters windows in Niigata. Inside the Kante Prime Minister's official residence, the air is heavy with the smell of stale coffee and fear. The red phone to Washington rings, but the response is hesitant diplomatic condemnation instead of carrier strike groups. The realization hits the Japanese leadership like a physical blow. They are alone. The self-restraint of the post-war era is no longer a shield. It is a suicide pact. In the dim light of the Situation Room, the order is signed. The sleeping giant awakes. The Iron Transformation. The transition is terrifyingly swift. Within 24 hours of the Prime Minister's announcement, the facade of self-defense evaporates. The National Diet Building is ringed by Type 10 tanks, their barrels pointed outward, not for show, but for defense against decapitation strikes. Civilian airports in Naha and Fukuoka are seized by the military. Commercial flights are grounded. The runways are immediately repurposed for E-2D Hawkeye early warning aircraft and KC-46 refueling tankers. The Japanese industrial machine, dormant for decades, roars to life with a wartime rhythm. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries receives a directive to unlock the software limiters on all exported defense technology. The Type 12 surface-to-ship missiles, previously restricted in range, are patched overnight to strike targets deep within the Chinese mainland. In the darkest depths of the Pacific, the Taige-class submarines, the big whales, slip their moorings. They don't patrol the coastlines anymore. They dive deep and head straight for the choke points of the first island chain, running silent, running deep, hunting for the acoustic signatures of Chinese ballistic missile submarines. The gray zone collapses, tension explodes at the Senkaku Islands. The Chinese maritime militia, used to bullying unarmed Coast Guard vessels, suddenly finds itself staring down the barrels of the JMSDF's Murasame-class destroyers. The rules of engagement have changed from observe and report to challenge and neutralize. When a Chinese militia trawler attempts to ram a Japanese cutter, expecting the usual retreat, it is met with a deafening burst of 20mm Vulcan cannon fire across its bow. The water erupts in white geysers. The message is clear. The buffer zone is gone. Beijing responds instantly. The People's Liberation Army Navy, PLAN, deploys the Liaoning Carrier Strike Group, pushing aggressively past the Miyako Strait. For the first time since World War II, the rising sun flag and the red flag confront each other on the high seas, separated by less than 2,000 yards of churning ocean. The electronic blindness. Before the missiles fly, the invisible war begins. Tokyo goes dark. A massive, coordinated cyber attack hits Japan's power grid, shutting down the subway systems in Shinjuku and Shibuya. Millions are trapped in darkness, but Japan bites back. The newly formed Cyber Defense Command, operating out of a bunker in Ichigaya, unleashes a counter-virus, targeting the targeting systems of the Chinese Southern Theater Command. On the front lines, radars go haywire. The SPY-1D radars on Japanese Aegis destroyers are flooded with ghost targets, thousands of false signals generated by Chinese electronic warfare planes. It is a game of blindness. Commanders are sweating in the Combat Information Centers, CIC, fingers hovering over launch keys, unable to distinguish a flock of birds from an incoming supersonic anti-ship missile. The psychological pressure is immense. One twitch, one misinterpretation of a blip, and the ocean turns to fire. The skies turn hostile. The escalation breaches the cloud layer. A flight of 4 JASDF F-35 as detects a violation of the Air Defense Identification Zone, ADIZ. 2 Chinese J-20 Mighty Dragons are escorting an H-6K bomber, simulating a nuclear strike run on Okinawa. Usually, the Japanese pilots would fly alongside and wave wings. Not today. The F-35 leader locks his fire control radar onto the J-20 seconds, a hard lock that triggers the piercing scream of the radar warning receivers in the Chinese cockpits. It is an act of war in all but name. The Chinese pilots break formation, releasing flares and chaff, maneuvering aggressively. The sky over the East China Sea becomes a tangled web of contrails. No shots are fired yet, but the kill chains are active. Both sides are one button press away from oblivion. The first blood. The breaking point arrives at dusk. A Japanese surveillance drone, a global hawk, is tracking the movement of a Chinese destroyer flotilla. Suddenly, a surface-to-air missile streaks up from the Chinese deck. The drone disintegrates in a ball of fire. Tokyo does not issue a protest. Instead, a battery of Type 03 medium-range surface-to-air missiles on Ishigaki Island activates. They don't target the ship. They target a Chinese Ka-28 anti-submarine helicopter hovering too close to Japanese territorial waters. A streak of white smoke, a flash, and the helicopter spirals into the sea. The silence that follows is heavier than the explosion. The threshold has been crossed. The proxy war is over. The kinetic war has begun. The hypersonic dawn. The silence of the Pacific is shattered not by a scream, but by a sonic boom that tears the sky apart. From the concealed mobile launchers in the forests of Kyushu and Amami-Oshima, the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force unleashes its trump card, the Hypervelocity Gliding Projectiles, HVGP. These are not standard missiles. They are kinetic nightmares traveling at Mach 5, designed to penetrate the deck armor of aircraft carriers. The target is the Liaoning Carrier Strike Group, now positioned aggressively south of Okinawa. The Chinese fleet's Type 346 radars detect the incoming threat, but the physics are unforgiving. The HVGPs maneuver erratically in the upper atmosphere, rendering the Chinese HQ-9 air defense missiles useless. The sky above the East China Sea turns into a kaleidoscope of interceptor trails and falling debris. Then, impact. 2 projectiles slam into the escorting Type 52D destroyers. The kinetic energy alone shears the bow off one ship and obliterates the bridge of the other. The formation is broken. The duel of the carriers. Seizing the chaos, the JS Izumo, now fully converted into an aircraft carrier, turns into the wind. The deck crews, moving with practiced precision, launch a squadron of F-35B Lightning IIs. These are not the F-15 seconds of the old guard. These are stealth predators. They don't engage in dogfights. They kill from beyond the horizon. Simultaneously, the Chinese J-15 Flying Sharks launch from the Liaoning, desperate to establish air superiority. The air battle is a chaotic mix of 21st century technology and primal violence. Missiles cross paths in the stratosphere. A J-15, banking hard to evade an AIM-120 AMRAAM, flies directly into the trap of a Japanese E-2D Hawkeye, which guides a shore-based Type 03 missile to the target. The explosion is a brief, bright flower against the dark blue sky. But the Chinese numbers are overwhelming. A swarm of kamikaze drones overwhelms the Izumo's Phalanx CIWS defenses. One drone impacts the flight deck, igniting a parked F-35B. Black smoke billows from the pride of the Japanese fleet, but the ship does not stop. The wolves from below. While the sky burns, the decisive blow comes from the crushing depths. The JS Hakuge White Whale, a Taige-class submarine running on lithium-ion batteries for near-total silence, has penetrated the inner defensive ring of the Chinese fleet. The sonar operator hears the distinct cavitation of the Liaoning's 4 propellers. Tube 1 through 4, flooding, solution set, fire. Four Type 89 heavy torpedoes streak through the water at 55 knots. The Chinese sonar operators scream warnings, but it's too late. The Type 055 cruiser flanking the carrier sacrifices itself, intercepting one torpedo, its hull groaning and snapping in half under the underwater explosion. But two torpedoes find their mark on the Liaoning. The massive explosions lift the 60,000-ton behemoth out of the water. The shockwave travels for miles. As the carrier lists heavily to starboard, thousands of tons of water rushing in, the strategic balance of the Pacific begins to sink with it. The strike on the mainland Japan does not stop at defense. Crossing a line that Washington had always forbidden, Tokyo authorizes a counterstrike on the source of the fire. Long-range cruise missiles, launched from F-2 fighters skimming the waves, strike the missile bases in Fujian province. This is the moment the world holds its breath. Japan is no longer just defending its islands, it is projecting power onto the continent. The climax is a scene of absolute technological carnage. Burning hulks of ships litter the Miyako Strait. The air is thick with the smell of aviation fuel and cordite. On the bridge of the damaged Izumo, the captain looks out at the horizon, lit by the fires of burning enemy vessels. The pacifist constitution is burning along with them. The message to the world is written in fire and steel. The samurai has not just returned, he has drawn blood, and he is the last one standing in the ring. The smoke over the Ryukyu Arc eventually clears, but the geopolitical map of Asia has been permanently redrawn. The Chinese fleet, battered and humiliated, limps back to its ports. The first island chain is no longer a barrier. It is a fortress of steel that Beijing dares not touch again for a generation. Japan has secured its survival, but the cost is the death of its soul. The pacifist nation that the world knew for 80 years is gone, buried under the wreckage of the Izumo's flight deck. In Washington, the mood is a mix of relief and terror. They have their victory, but they have lost a vassal and gained a rival. Japan is no longer a junior partner asking for permission. It is a nuclear-armed predator that hunts on its own terms. The Pax Americana in Asia hasn't just ended. It has been replaced by a cold, hard Pax Japonica. As the screen fades to black, one question hangs heavy in the air, chilling the spine of every statesman from Moscow to Washington. Now that the sword is unsheathed and the taste of blood is fresh, where will the samurai strike next? Because history teaches us one undeniable lesson: a giant never goes back to sleep.